It's a monumental day, folks. It is the first time I'm talking in depth about N9ne on this channel. One of my favourite artists, really, if not sometimes my favourite artist. I found him in 2019, I believe, maybe 2018, but I properly got into his stuff, I think, in 2019, listening to N9ne, and I really liked it. From what I can tell, that wasn't an album that people loved, but I really liked it, and from that point, I made up my mission. Probably partly because I hadn't listened to many artists at that point, and I wasn't listening to many artists at that point. I made it my mission to go through his entire discography, and here we are in 2025/6, and I've gone through all of his streaming albums, being I think 25 of them, including his collabos projects. I have not listened to The Lost Scripts of COD because it is not on streaming, and I just haven't bought it on CD yet. But that said, everyone knows who he is, and for those who don't know who he is, you've probably heard him maybe if you're a rap fan somewhere. He's a very interesting artist to me. He's worked with so many mainstream artists and has so much respect from so many mainstream artists in the rap genre, and yet, probably due to his Fuck the Industry campaign, he's not often on the radio, he's not often really talked about for people who are like surface level rap listeners, and yet he is one of the best, probably, in terms of his lyrical ability and in terms of, like, somewhat the impact he's had on rap a little bit because of all the people he's worked with when they were smaller, like Kendrick and other artists like that who are now so huge. He's a very interesting artist, and it's great to see him still being around, making albums maybe into the 30s. And today we're talking about album number 2789, maybe 6. 5816 Forest. This was an interesting release from Tech, I think, as someone who was watching it happen as a rollout. The first single for it came out, I believe, during the rollout for his previous album, being Cosm, Class of Strange Music. Strange Music being the label that he is part of and that he runs and basically is head of. I believe that the first single for this album, The Birth, came out before the album was released or just after, with a post, I think, somewhere saying that the album was going to try and release in the same year. So the initial intention was for Cosm and this album to release in 2024. And that didn't happen. The album didn't come out until summer 2025, which makes sense. I didn't think it would come out in 2024. And I think it works coming out this year. It would have worked coming out last year as well, I think, due to how different these projects are, with Cosm being a collabos project, which is what he does a lot, where he will collaborate with artists on his label and other labels, and pretty much every song has features on. Sometimes he's not even on them. But this was a very much N9ne project. This was almost featureless, and for the features you get, they're mostly hooks and choruses. It is primarily just N9ne doing what N9ne does, and doing it alone, which is not very common in modern N9ne music. A lot of albums, including N9ne, which I found him through, had a feature on almost every song, to the point where, as a listener who didn't really know who he was beforehand, and was always listening to songs with him, with someone else, I didn't know which one N9ne was, because there was always another voice along with him. Often, Chris Calico was on the track. I didn't know which one he was. I didn't know which one Tech was. So it is always interesting and fun to see them go back to quite a stripped back, this is just me album. And I think that this was a good timing to do, and a good snapback after the huge collaboration project that was Cosm. And you could tell that this had the intention of being a big release from Strange Music. Arguably, this is the most independent Tech album we've had since the huge moment that was the Face Off song blowing up and becoming his most streamed song ever. That's right, the song featuring The Rock that you've seen in every meme ever is a N9ne song. So you didn't know who N9ne was, now you do. Is the guy at the beginning. Oh, you've only heard the end? Shucks. And so I do think that this maybe would have worked coming out a bit earlier, maybe to try and capitalise on that a little bit more, but I don't know necessarily if this is really an album for the mainstream or for people who don't know who Tech already is, as this album does pride itself on being a storytelling album and being an album which you learn a lot more about Tech and his life and his career than maybe you already knew. There's some things that come up which, if you're someone who's listened to his entire discography, like I have, you will recognise, like the mention of the Road Dogg Villains, the mention of where he got his N9ne name from, appearances from his daughters like Rain, mentions of other crew members like Big Scoop, wherever he is. But it does do a good job at delving a bit more into them and giving a bit more detail of what exactly happened instead of just like a brief mention. You actually learn the stories behind them. And like I said, this album seemed like it was a big deal from Tech, with this being one of the first albums in a long time to come out on a vinyl, which Tech and Strange Music just hasn't done in a very long time, which I think sucks. Like there was a few albums by him which I would like to have as a physical like presentation piece, but they don't really do them much. I don't know if they've really done any vinyls since The Storm, maybe even earlier than that. Am I going to get this one on vinyl? No, for a few reasons. One of them being that delivery from the Strange Music shop in America to the UK costs a lot, but regardless, let's talk about the music. 22 songs, 58 minutes. Would you believe me if I said that that's quite short for a Tech N9ne album nowadays? And don't get me wrong, that's not a bad thing. I think Tech, at this point in his career, is making music for the fans, and I love that. He always releases albums maybe once a year, maybe once every 2 years, and they're always stacked full of so much music from him. And it's nice, Tech has definitely already proved himself in so many aspects of his career. He's at a point where he doesn't need to break into anywhere new, and he doesn't have to make music for people outside of his fan base or try and make music for people who aren't interested in him. And I'm glad that we have that, because what that makes room for instead is music made for the fans. Like I said, this album could be listened to for the first time by someone who isn't already a Tech fan, doesn't know who he is. I don't think that would really work very well. I think this would be much more appreciated by people like me and people who are fans of Strange Music, who already know a bit about Tech and who would like to learn more about how he came to be and how he came to be as big as he is and stuff like that. Now, do I think that's the intention fully? I do feel like this album, like I said, with the push of the vinyl and stuff like that, was maybe trying to be a big moment reaching into other audiences. It's almost resembling like what could end up being like a self-titled album, for example, with 5816 Forest being the name of his house when he was younger, or one of his houses. There were definitely moments in this where I think you could show it to someone who isn't a Tech N9ne fan, they will be very like, ooh, what's this? And they'll be like, that's a great song regardless. But I do think this really works better for people who are already fans of Tech N9ne, who already kind of have a rough idea of his story and who he is and his type of music. I think it works a lot better for people like that. That said, in the first listen, I was a bit underwhelmed by this project. This isn't the first time he's done like a story album. I think the last time he did it was Interfere in 2020, which wasn't entirely an album of storytelling, but this is that. This is every song is sold as this is going to be a song telling a story of this or telling a story of this. And it's kind of meant to be in a rough order of from when he was started rapping, or the birth as he calls it, or just generally from when he was young, all the way up to where he is now, where he's confident with his rap skill and he's confident with who he is and proud of what he's succeeded in. Almost every song on the album has a short little skit taking place before and after, taking the form of a phone call of him with someone in his family and his life. For example, his children, which do come across a bit a bit silly. I think every time that Tech tries to do an acting in a skit on a project, it does come across as like this isn't very believable. I think that does add to the charm of it, but I think with an album where sometimes it's trying to be a bit more like, okay, like let's set into the mood of this song. The song is about something serious, and it's like a phone call happening, which is very much obviously meant to be scripted between him and one of his daughters. It is quite funny, and so I do think that this album doesn't flow as well as I think the intention of having the skits being there is meant to create. That was definitely a really weird sentence. Hopefully you know what I mean by that. Like, instead of making songs flow into each other, I think it does almost pull the album to a hold for a sec before the next song. Most of the phone calls do then introduce the next song and kind of set up this thing of like, oh, well, let me tell you the song about this time when this happened, and then we go into the song next. So I do see what they're doing, and I do like it, but I don't think it works super well. And they do the thing where all the skits are on the songs themselves, as opposed to being separated into their own track, which I do understand in a way, but it does just make, if you're listening to it as a solo song, you don't have to listen to like a 30-second skit after or before it, which is annoying, listening to songs individually. But then again, this album, I guess, is meant to be listened to as one big project. But, with streaming, people like to listen to songs on their own. But then again, if you put every skit into its own thing, this album would be about 35 tracks, I guess. So I understand it a little bit. But yeah, like I said, the stories within this album are very varied in terms of his life. There's songs like The Birth, where he talks about, how he started getting into loving hip-hop in the first place. You got Friday to Sunday, triality, where he talks about, which he's mentioned before on projects, the household he grew up with and all the different religions and how he started to, meld them all together. You have Yoda, which is really hard to understand what the song is about. That's only because of how impressively written the song is, as silly as that sounds. The song features Lil Wayne on the hook, which I think would have been, again, more impressive if it wasn't for the recent project from Lil Wayne. This is like one of many features they've done together, and it definitely does stand out a little bit sound-wise. It does feel a bit more futuristic and like artificially produced than a lot of the other songs in this album. But that said, it's a great song, it's a banger, and it's written in this way where almost every line from Tech is written like a Yoda line, where it's like almost backwards, and like, you've kind of got to put them together in like the way that Yoda says stuff, which is very impressive, definitely, and does make the song unique and stand out. But if it's telling a story, it's fucking easy to get lost. He's flowing quickly like he does in a lot of his songs. He's speaking backwards, and while you're trying to like decipher what the first lyric meant, he's already moved on to like 4 others. And I think that is the thing with Tech, is that he's so impressive and he can rap so well now, and he can throw words together in such an interesting, intricate way. Even as someone listens to him a lot, sometimes I don't know what he's talking about. The songs still sound good, and I'm still liking him and bumping him, and he rides over the beat really well, and it technically super impressive, like putting all these words together and making them rhyme. And if you do actually look at the lyrics as you're listening, the sentences are cohesive. But he raps so quickly and technically well and complicated that it can be hard as a casual listener or someone who's not literally looking at the lyrics to keep up with what he's saying a lot. That said, I don't think this is an issue on many of the other songs in this project. I think Yoda is the biggest one where you can get lost in what he's talking about just because you're like, so, like, I don't know what's going on. This is great, but what the fuck? But I think most of the rest of the songs, it's pretty easy to keep up with the stories he's talking about. The album slowly continues talking about how he started producing for the first time, how he got his N9ne name. You've got some relationship sex cuts. No Rub, I think, is a funny one to pick up on specifically because it comes after the Rain Calls skit. Like I said, Rain is one of his daughters. So she's like, let me tell you another story about love. And he's like, yeah, don't get STDs, kids. Talk about how you shouldn't have sex without protection. Which, I mean, good. I'm glad that N9ne is pro-safety, pro-safe sex. But it's funny placement in the album, and like that is like brought up to be like, whoa, heard too much about that, dad, whatever. It's just funny to even have that on this album at all. I think that is what a lot of this project kind of boils down to, is it's just loads of different stories. Like sometimes, like I said, it makes sense, a bit of cohesion of like I said, going from listening to rap music for the first time, going to a studio for the first time, getting your N9ne name, making a rap at school and impressing the people at school. Sacrifice is a really good song featuring Jerry Robinson, which is the only strange music feature on this entire project, interestingly. But he's kind of talking about all the sacrifices he's made in life and the time he's given up and things he's missed out on in order to dedicate so much time and effort into the craft of rap when he was smaller, which obviously worked out in the end. But I think it's a very good song, a very interesting thing to talk about of like, yeah, when you are creating stuff, you are going to be sacrificing stuff to do it. And I do think that sometimes people don't realize that. I think sometimes if you see someone who's talented or already skilled at something, you're like, oh my God, you're so lucky. But a lot of the time, for someone to be that good at rapping or writing songs or singing or dancing or any skill, any job, you've probably put a lot of time into it. And you probably have had to give up time with your loved ones or money to do that, because you can spend that time doing something else. And I do love that is something that is here on this album. And there are a lot of songs like that which I do think stand out as some of his best in recent years. This I think is great, where he's kind of talking about like, I might not know much, but I fucking know how to make good music. And I love that he now has this confidence, and has for obviously years now, but he has this confidence to be like, look, I ain't the best, but I fucking know how to make music, and I know what I'm doing here in this career. And it's a lovely choir-ish track. The Kevin Church Johnson feature is great. I love this song. It's probably my favourite song on the album, to be honest with you. RDV is another banger, talking about, his time in the Rogue Dog Villains. I do feel like it's maybe a bit dangerous to name all the people who were in that gang in the song, but, I assume you thought about that. But as a song, great. Yoda, like I said, as much as it's like a flurry on the senses, I think is a highlight. And overall, I think it's a very good album for N9ne fans. Every song has a story where if you listen intently enough, and maybe if you read the lyrics, there's a cohesive story to it. Sometimes I do feel like the stories kind of go nowhere, or maybe if they don't go nowhere, they end quite suddenly. For example, I think Ball and Lola stop quite suddenly, although they have told or they have to tell. But I do feel like that they just suddenly kind of end, and all of a sudden there's like the phone call happening. But you know, if you've told the whole story, I guess you're done. So yeah, I think it's an interesting release from Tech, and I do feel like it's going to stand out in its discography as like a album with a purpose. Which, you know, once you're like this many albums in, it can be easy to kind of think, you know, what am I still making music for? Have I said everything I've already needed to say? But having this album of like, this is my storytelling album to really tell my story, like I said, almost like in a what you'd expect to be like a self-titled album kind of thing. I think this is very good and a very interesting release, and does kind of justify its existence this far in his career. I think if he made this 10 years ago, maybe he wouldn't be confident enough to end with this. I know a little bit later from here, it might seem like, why didn't you do it a while ago? You know, you've already proven yourself 15 years ago. Why have you taken so long to make this project? So overall, I think if you're a N9ne fan, if you're a Strange Music fan, if you really want to know about who this guy is, it's worth picking up on some of these songs. There are definitely some that you can skip. There are definitely some that are not my favourites. I still like all of the songs on here, but there are definitely some which I wouldn't show someone else, for example, to kind of like be like, yeah, this guy's great. Listen to No Rub. Hey bro, you haven't heard Excited? That's crazy. But overall, interesting project. I see what he was going for it. Do I think it was executed perfectly? No. I feel like there are things that could have been done better. Like I said, the skits I think are a bit clunky. I think some of the songs just didn't need to really be there. I think it could have been a more cohesive story and could have, you know, been a bit more of a solid concept. But that's what Tech does. He gives you lots of music, and I'm not going to argue against that. I don't think Tech's the best album maker, but I do think he makes a lot of good songs. And like I said, he knows how to make music, and he knows how to rap, definitely. And personally, as a fan of him, I would rather that the whole album have some songs I like less but still like, than cut the runtime in half and only have what needs to be there. Is that maybe the best way of making an album and the best way of making projects? Or the best way of wanting projects? No, probably not, and I'm aware of that. But I'm not going to complain for getting more music from one of my favourite artists. And for what this music is, I think is pretty interesting and pretty good. I intend to go back and do these videos for as many of his projects as I can, to be honest with you. And I had thoughts on lots of them. They all kind of used to feel like no album had its own identity, but the more I thought about it, the more I realised that they definitely do. If you just stop listening to music on shuffle, you'll realise that, Will. And so I do think, I do have things to say about all of his projects, and I'm looking forward to going to more of them. The next one I'll be making a video on, unless he makes a project before I get to do it, will be Class of Strange Music, which I think has some very interesting things to talk about in terms of why it exists, how it exists, and other things that aren't there and are there. For now, I'm going to listen to Fish Captain and be working all damn day.